Let's move on to soft commodity prices, because soft commodity prices having another poor month in June, led by wheat, coffee and rice falling over 5%. So for more on some of the key factors that we're seeing specifically, of course, for soft commodity producers, Edward George, Head of Soft Commodities Research at EcoBank, joining us from London. Edward, just to start off with, I suppose cotton posting some modest gains for the month of June, but are there once again key themes that are underpinning the underperformance that persists in the space?
Well, I think the main issue with soft commodity prices at the moment is oversupply, coupled with uncertainty about whether consumption levels are going to come back. If we take a case of sugar, where prices have been steadily falling and continue to fall, there is an expectation of ample supplies, not just coming from Brazil, but also from Thailand. But of course, weakening of emerging market currencies has had an impact on a lot of prices, because quite a few of the soft commodity producers actually export their soft commodities in dollars. And so this has made their own production cheaper. Ultimately, though, the fundamentals are coming through, and even the uptick in cotton last month was really on short-term concerns that the USA might export more cotton to China, but ultimately there's still going to be a surplus there as well, and that's why we've seen across the board prices falling quite strongly over the last few months.
I mean, let's just talk about the role of China from a global perspective right now when it comes to demand. If they are in fact rebuilding their stocks and they continue to do that, how could African cotton producers benefit from this? And are they positioned to do that?
Well, I think one of the big issues for cotton producers in West Africa is that they are in many ways hostages of the international market. Africa only produces around 5% of the world's cotton. China, USA and South Asia dominate the production, and ultimately they're the ones who control the prices. But we are seeing a real surge in production in West Africa, particularly Mali, which has produced 450,000 tons of seed cotton last season, is hoping to produce up to 600,000 tons going forward. We're also seeing a recovery in Benin sector. Cote d'Ivoire is back on the map as well. So ultimately, we're seeing health in the sector there because of a lot of strength from a lot of support from the governments and from the different agencies. But when it comes to international prices, they're going to have to look over their shoulder at China. If China decides to resume massive buying of cotton for its strategic reserves, it'll push up prices. And if it decides to stop, then they could really suffer.
Now, let's move on to sugar. The benchmark price for sugar down 16% year to date. And talking about Kenya, two developments there, lifting a ban on Ugandan sugar. And then you've got these safeguards, COMESA safeguards, that have been protecting the local sugar producers in Kenya. And the deadline for expiry of that is is nearing. How is that going to affect sugar producers right now in Kenya? How are these two factors playing into the efficiencies of these sugar producers?
Well, I think Kenya's sugar sector is in a very difficult position. The main sugar producing region is not very efficient. It costs around $870 a ton to produce sugar there. That's about twice the price in Swaziland or in Zambia. And of course, these countries can actually export to EAC under COMESA. So in an attempt to try and reform Kenya's sugar sector, Kenya got an exemption from COMESA 10 years ago to restrict the number of imports coming into the country to try and give some support to the sector. The trouble is, after two extensions, this exemption is due to run out in 2014. And this is actually part of the reason behind this recent problem with sugar imports from Uganda, Tanzania and Zambia, where the government was claiming that in fact these imports were breaking the quotas. So ultimately the government has promised to speed up its privatization efforts, but the real difficulty is that the sector is just not as competitive as the other sectors. The world is awash with sugar at the moment, particularly southern East Africa is awash with Brazilian sugar competing with local supplies. And so I think that's why there is this crisis that they are facing.
Mm-hmm. Let's just look at Cote d'Ivoire right now in light of the developments in the cocoa sector there, because the local coffee and cocoa regulator appeared to get the reference price wrong, and they're going to have to refund all the local cocoa producers with the difference in the new reference price and the official one that was initially agreed to. So how did they get it so wrong, and how much of a refund are the local producers going to get?
Well, I think the important thing to bear in mind is all processing sectors in the world receive some form of subsidy. It might be through import caps, it might be through funding from the government, tax breaks, etc. And ultimately, Cote d'Ivoire has been trying to reform its system. When it went through privatization 10 years ago, it ended up with 6 different marketing boards, huge lack of transparency, misspent funds. There was then a temporary management board, and the CCC is trying to implement now what it sees as a clear pricing structure. Ultimately, it wants the flexibility to tweak it each year, and that is why it got rid of a tax break which was given to processors in the country if they would invest. That was supposed to last 5 years, it ended up lasting 12. So the current idea is that if it turns out that processors are having to pay over the odds for lower quality mid-crop beans, the government will then reimburse a certain amount of that, which is open to negotiation. And I guess that gives them the flexibility. But there's no doubt about it, there is still some uncertainty about this pricing regime, and that is undermining confidence.